What's up everyone? So the last time I did a knife tier list video was about a year ago when I still had the long hair, which looked terrible. But in that year, I've played with every single knife in the game extensively, maybe besides the Navaja, but I think every knife in the game does offer something unique and special. So today I want to make an objective tier list where we kind of weigh, the negatives and the positives and kind of rank the knife where it deserves to be ranked, not necessarily my opinion. With that being said, let's get right into the video. Before we start, as you can see, I do not have an F tier for this tier list. I don't think any knife in the game truly deserves F tier, the bottom of the barrel. Yes, there are a few knives that are pretty bad. However, I don't think any of them actually deserve F tier. First up, the Bayonet, which I think is a great knife with a ton of benefits. First up, the blade shape is pretty standard and the blade is quite large. Not as big as the M9, but still it's very long, which makes a lot of finishes look really good on this knife. Next up, the animations are pretty standard. However, if you like opping or you like the super over the top pullout animations, this one has you covered. We've got that flip, which looks really nice. And the third biggest thing is that this knife can actually get rare special patterns. For example, fire and ice, diamond gems, max pink, max purple dopplers, that's all available on this knife, which is a huge benefit. And the last thing I do want to cover is that the handle tends to stay green with different finishes, which can be a negative. However, you kind of hide that in the hand on your right side, so you don't get to see the handle that much. So overall, just a great knife. With all that in mind, I do think the Bayonet definitely deserves to go in A tier. It's not the best knife in the game, but it's definitely a wonderful knife all around, including the animations, the blade size, and of course the rare special patterns. The Bowie got a huge update in CS2 with the left hand, so if you like glove knife combos, this knife is definitely viable now. Now let's talk about the benefits. The animations are super smooth, they all chain together very nicely, they all look like they're 60 FPS, which is kind of unique to the Bowie. Next up, the blade is enormous, the biggest blade in the game, bigger than the M9, and the price is very appealing. It's not a super expensive knife. One more important thing about this knife is that it actually changes accent colors depending on the phase of the gamma Doppler or Doppler. So if you do plan on getting this knife, I would highly recommend the Doppler or gamma Doppler finishes. They're just going to make the blade look even better. The Bowie is a great choice all around with the animations and the big blade. However, the blade is not the cleanest, so I do have to put it in B tier, but I still think B tier is always going to be a great choice, especially on a budget. Next up, the Butterfly, which is the undisputed king of animations in CS2. It's the most expensive knife in the game. People absolutely love this knife. There's a ton of pullout animations, inspect, even a ton of rare animations as well that all look really nice. Also, this knife does have a pretty small blade, so keep that in mind. If you do plan on getting like a gem knife, you're not going to get a ton of blade. However, the big standout here is going to be the handles. They actually change depending on the finish of the blade, and specifically for gamma Dopplers and Dopplers, they also change color for every single phase. So if you like inspecting, I think it's a great choice, especially for glove knife combos, and I have to mention the sound design on this knife is wonderful. You can stim this knife all day long. For me, the Butterfly is one of the 3 best knives in the game, and it of course has to go in S tier. Next up, the classic knife, which is very OG. It's got that special, idle animation that people love about it. It's got some pretty nice animations as well when you inspect. You have that one rare animation where you toss it up and down. As far as blade size, it's quite large. A lot of finishes look great, but keep in mind this knife is quite limited on the actual finishes that you can get on it. One more thing about this knife, the edge wear on this blade is actually really unique, especially on like a Crimson Web or any of the finishes that wear a lot. You can make some really cool blades if you get them in .31 float. That right there is the rare animation. Overall, just a nice unique knife, and I know a lot of people that love this knife. Overall, the kit for the classic knife is wonderful. We got some great animations from the inspects to the idle. It is a little bit limited on finishes, and it's not as fancy as knives in A or S, but for me, this knife should easily go top of B. Next up, the Falchion knife, which is a great budget knife with some positives and some negatives. First up, the animations are wonderful. We've got a nice inspect. The right hand stab is really cool. You kind of catch the knife in midair, and then the rare animation where you kind of bounce the knife is incredible, especially if you get a nice finish on it like a Doppler or gamma Doppler or even the fade. You're gonna really get to see the knife perfectly, and you can even defy the laws of physics. What knife does that? But overall, it's a great knife. However, I do have to talk about the idle position. You kind of cut off the left hand. You don't see like half of the left hand, which some people might really, not really like at all. I'm not the biggest fan of it. However, like I said, if you want a cheap knife and good animations, I think the Falchion is a wonderful choice. So the Falchion is quite divisive on where it should be ranked in the community. I personally think it's a great budget choice. With everything that you get at the price that you pay, I think it's a great knife. Not one of the best, but definitely a great knife, and I think it should go in B tier towards the bottom. Next up, the flip knife, which is an OG knife, and it's quite boring on paper, right? There's no special animations, no pull-out animations. However, this knife is going to be for those that appreciate clean blades and nice finishes. The blade shape on the flip knife is is just super satisfying, very clean, and nice and simple. If you want to get like a gem knife, Dopplers, gamma Dopplers, fades, even normal finishes like blue steel and black laminates, they're all gonna really pop on this knife because the blade shape is super clean. Also, this knife does get special rare patterns. It's one of the rare 4 knives, so it's gonna get the fire and ices, the diamond gems, the max pink, purple, green, all of that is available on this knife and at a reasonable price. So overall, like I said, this is a gentleman's knife. It's not stimming, it's just having a clean, large blade. With that being said, the flip knife is quite basic. However, I do think the clean blade and the variety of finishes on the knife is really gonna land it somewhere top of B tier. In my opinion, the gut knife is the most underrated knife in the entire game. It offers so much, and people just hate it because it's kind of like a chubby knife. However, let's talk about the benefits. First up, the red handle actually gives you some nice options for glove knife combos. If you pair it with like Scarlet Shamas or needle points, that's going to match really well. The blade is actually very large, and if you look at the prices, this knife is incredibly cheap. I mean, you can get Dopplers and gamma Dopplers for like 200 to 300, which is just crazy cheap, especially for how big the blade actually is. Also, it is the cheapest knife in the game to get special rare patterns, so you can get gut knife diamond gems on this knife, and I think it looks phenomenal. Like I said, it is a great budget choice. Even the pullout animation is a standout. I think it looks really nice. It's the same one as the Huntsman, and I think it looks great. It basically does everything you want it to do. It's not over the top, and the biggest thing is going to be it's super cheap, and you can get really nice finishes on it for a low price. When I used the gut knife, I actually enjoyed it a ton, from the pullout animation to the huge blade to the super cheap price. I think that's the main selling point here. If you want a large, cheap blade that offers some really nice finishes, the gut knife is a great choice. I think it definitely deserves top of C tier. Like I said, C tier doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, right? It's just a little bit worse than B, A, and S, but I still think it's a great knife. Next up, we've got the Huntsman, which I consider to be the best value knife in the entire game. No questions about it. There's so many benefits to it, and especially at a low price, it's just such a good value knife. First off, the blade is humongous. Yes, you don't get any special animations. However, the pullout animation is the same as the gut knife, and it looks wonderful. You kind of like spin it in the air. You can even toss that into the inspect, and you kind of like make it a fluid motion, which is great. A lot of finishes do look really good on this blade, especially because it's a full tang knife, so you get to see the finish on the handle as well in the middle. Also, let's talk about the handle. It's full black. It's going to work perfectly with Nox. Any of the black gloves are going to match really nicely, especially if you do like a gem finish. It definitely pops on this knife, and once again, it's not going to set you back, 5, 6, 7,000. It's only, I believe, 1,000 to 1,500 depending on the gem, which I think is a steal at that price. Overall, it's a great knife, large blade. You're not getting the super crazy features of the multi-$1,000 knives, but as far as value goes, I think this knife is a banger. The Huntsman excels at value because of the massive blade, black handle, and cheap price, and even though it's not as fancy as something in, A or S, I still think it firmly deserves to be in top of B tier, and it's a wonderful knife all around. Next up, the Karambit, which I now consider to be the best knife in the game by far. So let's talk about it. First up, the black handle. It's going to work really nicely with black gloves like the Nox or black ties. You can do some incredible combos with it. The blade shape is unique. We've got that tiger claw. A lot of finishes absolutely pop on this blade. It just looks so nice. As far as animations go, you can stem it. Yes, you can spin it. However, if you want like a nice, simple, elegant knife, this one is perfect. The smooth animations really complement the knife really nicely. You're not getting a ton of variety like with the butterfly, and I think people that get the Karambit actually prefer that over the crazy animations. Now, this knife is the king of rare patterns. Any rare knife pattern in the game, it's going to be on the Karambit, and it's going to look the best on the Karambit. From cyan bits to blue gems to diamond gems to max pink, purple, green, fire and ice, everything is available on this knife, and it's just going to look incredible. And overall, just this knife has everything you could possibly want, all packaged into a very expensive price. That's the only thing. It's expensive, but for a reason. The one drawback to the Karambit is going to be the wear. It's very visible on the corner, but you can kind of get around it because of the float or the wear pattern. You can kind of change it up and make it cleaner. And of course, this is going to be the best knife in the game in my opinion. Final big 3 knife in CS2 in my opinion is going to be the M9. Now, this knife doesn't have any special animations, and you're not paying for that. What you are paying for is having a humongous blade and a super clean blade. When you combine the two, you get an incredible knife that absolutely excels at making good finishes look incredible, especially your high tiers, your gems. Even all the normal finishes, they all pop like crazy with this knife. You can make some incredible glove knife combos. So it's a pretty basic knife at its core, but what it does good, it does the best. A lot of people do say the M9 is heavily overrated, and I disagree. I think it absolutely deserves S tier, and when it comes to blade shape and size, pretty much nothing comes even close. Alright, look. Whew. I'm gonna try and not crash out on this knife. I'm gonna keep it nice and civil. So look, the Navaja does a few things pretty well. It's got the engravings on the blade, and we also have a pretty cool handle that's kind of orange. It works really well with POW gloves and tiger strikes for the orange match. But besides that, it's the cheapest knife in the game because the blade is not very appealing. It is absolutely tiny, and it also looks like a spoon, okay? It kind of wastes a lot of, nice finishes because the blade is so small, you barely get to see it. I get why people like this knife. I will say the sound design is pretty good on this knife. The flip, the little pull-out animation is pretty cool, but you guys have to understand, I have to rank it the lowest in the game just because the blade is absolutely minuscule and wastes a lot of really good potential with good finishes. Next up, the Nomad, which has some really cool features to it. First up, that rare, pull-out animation where you cut yourself. It's a nice touch. Even the Inspect, this one right here where you get to see both sides. It just gives so much life to this knife and so many interesting features. Even with this animation, you can keep holding it, and if you get like a case hardened knife where you have like different finishes on both sides, you get to see both of them super clearly, which is really nice. It's got some great animations. The blade shape and size is quite good as well. I love the metallic handle on this knife. It kind of stays the same with a lot of finishes. Keep in mind, this knife is a little bit limited on what finishes you can get on it, but overall, just such an interesting knife that is super underappreciated. Overall, I find the Nomad to be heavily underappreciated. I think it's a great knife with some really cool features on it, especially the Inspect, the metallic handle, just a lot of interesting things about this knife that definitely landed in top of B tier. Personally, I would rank it A, but I think B tier, top of B tier is going to be a fair placement. Next up, the Paracord knife, which actually has some great animations to it. That right there was the rare pullout where you kind of toss it side to side, and it even has 2 Inspect animations. So for a knife that is absolutely insanely cheap and in the same price range as Navaja and Shadow Daggers, this knife offers some phenomenal Inspects. Now, I will say the blade shape is a little bit boring, it's nothing fancy. But even look at this, you can kind of hold this animation and see both sides, similar to the Nomad. It is a little bit limited on finishes as well, so you kind of have to work with your fades or your case hardens. But overall, it's a decent knife. If you want something budget, you can do some pretty nice glove knife combos with it. But I will also have to mention, it's not the most interesting or appealing knife. With that being said, the Paracord is pretty unique with the handle and the rare animations. However, I do find the gut knife to be better value. But if you don't like the gut knife, the Paracord is a great choice, especially for super budget picks. My one hot take for the video is that Shadow Daggers are insanely overhated and it's super forced. They're actually pretty good knives, especially for the price. They're incredibly cheap, and yes, the blades are small, which is a huge, negative to it. However, you get 2 of them, which is pretty cool, and also the Inspect lets you see the inner palm of gloves really well. So if you have nice gloves and you like the inner palms, this Inspect is perfect. The animations are pretty fluid, there's no rare ones, but they chain together quite well, and you can even spin them exactly like the Karambit, which a lot of people don't know about. So overall, I think these knives offer some pretty cool benefits, and especially when it comes to finishes, you actually change the color of the handle as well. That's like the accent color that gets changed. So with Dopplers, Gamma Dopplers, all of that changes the accent color, and on Inspect, it just looks so good. Even with like Tiger Strikes changing orange, it just makes the knives pop, especially on the Inspect. Overall, Shadow Daggers are dope, great synergy with gloves, nice Inspect for the inner palm, the accent color change with finishes is a great touch. I do have to put them in C because obviously everything in B is better. However, for the price, I think these knives are really fun to play with in CS2. Next up, the skeleton knife, which right there was the rare pullout animation. In my opinion, the best animation in the entire game. It is quite rare. However, I do have to say, there's also the rare Inspect animation. You can keep holding it to keep spinning it. I have to say the skeleton knife absolutely excels in the animation department. Now let's talk about the blade. Super clean blade. It's modeled after like a kunai. We've got some cutouts in it. Very unique compared to, the rest of the lineup of knives in CS2. I think this knife is unique. It does everything really well, but it kind of, gets dragged back by the fact that you can only get so many finishes on it. Once that gets updated, this knife gets, Dopplers and Gamma Dopplers. I think this knife will be easily S tier for me, but overall, I think it's a phenomenal knife. Personally, one of my favorites. Now, as far as rankings go, I think the skeleton knife easily deserves to be at the top of A tier. It is pretty close to the S tier knives, but I think the S tier knives are just a little bit better. However, skeleton knife, one of the best knives in the game, no debate. Next up, the Stiletto, which I actually used to hate, but everyone who said I was wrong about the Stiletto, I agree with you guys. I absolutely love this knife. I think it's such a banger, such a clean, elegant looking knife. That sound design here is wonderful. the animations are really dope. So we've got the normal one where you toss it up and down, you can keep holding it. The rare inspect is actually where you kind of like look at it side to side right there, which is pretty nice. Also, the brown handle is going to work with a ton of gloves in the game. A ton of gloves have brown as the base color. Even, for example, spearments have brown, so it's going to make a ton of great glove knife combos. The blade, even though it's like, you know, very small, I think it's super clean. It's kind of like a pointy, you know, stilettos are pointy and long, and especially because the finish actually ends up on the handle as well. A lot of the fancier finishes like the Dopplers and Gamma Dopplers really pop on this knife. Sorry, no Gamma Dopplers on this knife, which is a little bit of a drawback, but I'm sure it will get updated. Overall, Stiletto, gentleman's knife, clean, elegant, makes wonderful glove knife combos. With that being said, Stiletto easily going up to A tier. I think it's right below the Skeleton and above the Bayonet. Next up, the survival knife, which does have some pretty cool animations. The rare one kind of tosses up the knife and catches it, which is pretty cool. You also do get a rare inspect animation as well. Animation department for the survival knife is dope. However, this knife is super cheap, which is a positive, but the reason being, the blade is not clean. CS2 players do enjoy their cleaner blades. I've seen that pretty much with everyone that I've spoken to, and I think the reason this knife doesn't get a lot of love is because of the blade. Yes, I get it in theme, it's supposed to be a survival knife with a lot of utility, but you know, there's just too much on the blade, from the gut hook to the serrated edges to the cutouts. There's just too much going on with this blade. However, like I said, if you want a nice knife that's super cheap with pretty good animations and an off-meta pick, I would say this is a decent choice. With that being said, I do think the survival knife is going to go at the bottom of C tier, pretty comparable to the Paracord, but I do think the Paracord does have a cleaner blade. Next up, the Talon knife, which does share that curved blade design with the Karambit, but that's where the similarities end. First off, let's talk about the inspects. The pull-out animation is like a big fan out. Some people love it, some people hate it. And for the inspect, you have the rare one where you actually spin the knife over and over. They actually fixed it. You don't get to hear that annoying sound constantly, and it looks pretty nice. You can keep holding it. Now, next up, let's talk about the actual ivory handle. It is the only knife in the game to have that, and it's a huge benefit because it makes for some incredible glove knife combos. With cream colored gloves, for example, the king snakes look incredible with this knife. Overall, this knife offers a ton. It's a unique blade design. It's more of like a fancy knife compared to the Karambit when it comes to animations, and it's full tang. So overall, the kit for this knife is wonderful. When it comes to ranking it, I think it firmly deserves to be an A tier. Not as clean as the Karambit, but it does have a few more features like the inspects. Lastly, we've got the Ursus with some great animations. That right there was the rare pullout where you toss it up and catch it. It also has a rare inspect where you can kind of flip it. I'll show that in a second. The knife is very angular and it's pretty cool. It looks pretty clean, kind of like a Tonto in a Daisho set. Very angular, makes a lot of finishes look really good, especially on the Dopplers. You can get some really nice patterns as well because the blade isn't enormous. I will say one negative for this knife is going to be the green handle. It tends to stay green with a lot of finishes, so that kind of makes the knife look a little bit less clean, but finally, let's actually get to the rare inspect. And this right here is going to be the rare inspect animation. You can keep holding it. It is super clean and super unique. The sound design also is really cool with it, where you kind of hear the fingers hitting the handle of the blade. Overall, I think it's a super unique knife. I really enjoyed using it. You don't get tired of the animations, and it's very cheap. As far as ranking the Ursus knife, it definitely deserves to be in B tier, somewhere in the middle. Really comes down to personal preference, how much you like the animations, but I think the Ursus is a great budget choice. The last knife of the video is going to be the Kukri, and I will say the animations are very floaty because you toss the knife around a lot, so it's kind of floating a lot. The inspect is going to be static. You get to see both sides of the blade pretty well. In the blade shape, it's kind of like a banana, but the blade is quite large. If you like these curved blades that are big, I think it's a pretty good choice. The black handle is a nice touch. Very similar to the Huntsman, you can pair this knife with a ton of combos. For example, Nox look really good with this knife, but overall, it's a pretty nice knife. Not the cleanest blade out of all of them, but overall, a pretty good kit. And finally, I think the Kukri definitely deserves to be in B tier. With that being said, here's the final list of the video. I try to be as objective as possible. Obviously, there is a bit of subjectivity when it comes to blade shape and blade size, but like I said, I try to include all the positives and negatives into the knife and rank it as fairly as possible. If you enjoyed the video, consider subbing to the channel and dropping a like on the video. It would be heavily appreciated. And with that being said, I hope to see y'all in the next video. Peace out, everyone. They're not finna notice, bruh. They won't notice. Add a row below. Let's do F minus. Okay. There we go. There we go. Yeah.